She had been sitting in the wrong seat at the wrong wedding for 45 minutes before she realized the groom had put her there on purpose. Jolene Pruitt smoothed the hem of her navy blue wrap dress over her thighs and stared at the champagne flute in front of her that she hadn't touched. She was seated at table 11, wedged between an elderly man who had fallen asleep before the salad course and a woman who kept checking her phone with the frantic energy of someone expecting terrible news. The centerpiece was a tall glass vase stuffed with white peonies that smelled faintly of something chemical, like the flowers had been spritzed with furniture polish. Table 11 was at the very back of the ballroom, near the service corridor, which meant she could hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and feel the cold draft every time a waiter pushed through the swinging doors. It was the kind of table you put people at when you needed a body in a seat, but didn't particularly want to look at the body. Jolene had known this going in. She was the event accountant for the Beaumont Grand Hotel, which meant she handled invoices and vendor contracts and the quiet, invisible financial machinery that made evenings like this one possible. She did not get invited to these events. She got assigned to them. Her boss, Gerald Fitch, had handed her the assignment 3 days ago with the cheerful efficiency of a man who had never once questioned whether the work he delegated was appropriate. The Kellner Vasquez wedding, he'd said, sliding a folder across his desk. Saturday. Black tie. They're paying for the platinum package. I need you there to sign off on any last-minute additions and make sure the catering overage gets coded correctly before midnight. I'll be in the back office, Jolene had said. Gerald had shaken his head. The bride specifically requested that financial sign-offs happen tableside this year. Something about the last event where the cake add-on got lost in the system. You'll need to be on the floor. So here she was, on the floor, at table 11, in a dress she'd bought specifically because the woman at the boutique on 5th had looked at her wide hips, at the soft curve of her belly, at the generous weight of her, and said without any prompting, "That one was made for a figure like yours." Jolene had stood in the dressing room for 5 minutes after that, pressing the fabric against her sides and trying to decide if the woman had been kind or condescending. She still wasn't sure. She'd bought the dress anyway. The wedding was beautiful in the way that very expensive weddings tended to be. Relentlessly so, almost aggressive about it, like beauty was being enforced rather than celebrated. The bride, Cassandra Kellner, was 26 and luminous in a gown that probably cost more than Jolene's annual salary. The groom, Derek Vasquez, was 31 and had the kind of jaw that photographed well and the kind of eyes that didn't quite meet yours when he shook your hand. Jolene had met Derek Vasquez twice before, once during the initial contract negotiation, where he had glanced at her and then directed every subsequent question to Gerald, despite the fact that Jolene was the one holding the spreadsheets, and once, 6 weeks ago, in the hotel corridor outside the event planning suite, where he had rounded a corner and nearly walked into her and had said, and she remembered this precisely, "Oh, I didn't see you there." She had smiled, because what else do you do? And she had stepped aside, and he had walked on. She reached for the champagne now. The bubbles had gone flat at 9:47 p.m., when the dancing had been going for an hour, and the wedding cake had been cut, and the catering manager had already found Jolene twice with questions about the overtime charge for the string quartet. A ripple went through the room. It didn't arrive as a sound. It arrived as a silence. The string quartet wound down mid-phrase, not because the song ended. Because the 4 musicians looked toward the entrance and simply stopped playing. The conversations nearest the door dropped first, then spread inward like a stone dropped in still water until the entire ballroom, 400 guests, 2 bartenders, 7 waiters, and 1 extremely tired event accountant, was quiet. 4 men stepped through the gilded entrance doors. They wore dark suits that had nothing to do with the wedding dress code, and they moved with the unhurried, deliberate calm of people who were entirely used to rooms going quiet when they entered. Behind them came a fifth man. Jolene had spent enough years working the financial back channels of this city's hospitality industry to know what certain kinds of money looked like up close. She had processed invoices for businessmen and politicians and the occasional person whose source of income was vague and whose tips were extraordinarily generous. She thought she had a reasonable sense of where the lines were and how close to them various people operated. The man who walked through the doors of the Beaumont Grand Ballroom that Saturday night was not operating near any line she recognized. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of build that suggested he had once done physical work and had never entirely stopped. Dark hair, close cropped. A face that was all clean angles and controlled expression, like something carved by someone who valued precision over warmth. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older, in the way that certain men age in a direction that is not younger but is somehow more. His suit was black and fit him with a specificity that suggested it had been made for him and only him. His name was Stellan Rourke. Jolene knew this not because she moved in his circles. She emphatically did not, but because 2 months ago she had been asked to quietly reconcile a discrepancy in the hotel's private event ledger, and his name had appeared in a wire transfer notation in a way that made her very carefully not write it down anywhere and very carefully never mention it to anyone. Stellan Rourke was not the kind of man who appeared on Forbes lists. He was the kind of man that the people on Forbes lists did not discuss at dinner. He came to a stop near the entrance and surveyed the room with the unhurried patience of someone taking inventory. His gaze moved across the tables methodically, and then Jolene had no explanation for this. It found her. She looked down at her champagne glass. When she looked up, he was already walking toward table 11. The elderly man beside her had woken up. The woman with the phone had gone very still. Jolene sat with her back straight and her hands flat on the table and tried to look like someone who had done absolutely nothing unusual. Because she had done absolutely nothing unusual, and the effort of trying to look that way was making her feel deeply unusual. Stellan Rourke reached her table and stopped. He looked at the empty chair across from her, the one that had been empty all night, and without asking, he pulled it out and sat down. "You're Jolene Pruitt," he said. His voice was low, and even without any particular inflection. "I work for the hotel," she said. It came out steadier than she expected. "I know." He folded his hands on the table. His eyes were a dark, specific gray, the color of a lake before rain. "I'm looking for Derek Vasquez." Jolene blinked. "The groom. Until recently, one of my financial managers." He paused. "I discovered this afternoon that someone has been redirecting funds from 4 of my holding accounts over the course of 11 months. Incremental amounts, very carefully structured to stay beneath the reporting threshold. Whoever did it was very good." Jolene said nothing. She was very good at that. "The transfers were authorized using a secondary signature protocol," Stellan continued. He was not raising his voice. He was not leaning forward. He seemed entirely calm in the way that certain weather systems seem entirely calm right before they become catastrophic. "A protocol that only 3 people in my organization have access to. One of those people is currently on a flight to Zurich. One is in a hospital bed with a very inconvenient appendix. The third," he glanced toward the dance floor, where Derek Vasquez was no longer visible, "appears to have left his own wedding reception approximately 15 minutes ago." Jolene looked at the dance floor. The bride was still there, dancing with what appeared to be her father, her face arranged in the particular bright expression of someone who was performing happiness hard enough to make it real. "You didn't come to the wedding," Jolene said slowly. "You came because you tracked him here." His phone was still active. Something shifted in Stellan's, briefly. Not softening in Stellan's expression. Exactly, but acknowledging. "He sent a message 18 minutes ago. To your email address. The silence that followed was so complete that Jolene could hear the ice settling in the water pitcher 2 tables over. That's not possible, she said. I don't know Derek Vasquez. I processed the contract for this event, and I've been on the floor tonight for catering overages. That's the entirety of my professional contact with the man. I'm aware, Stellan said, which is why I'm sitting here instead of somewhere else. Jolene pulled out her phone. She had 3 unread notifications. 2 were from the catering manager about the overtime code. 1 was from an address she didn't recognize. For when you need it, DV. She opened it with the peculiar slow-motion clarity of someone watching something happen to them that they haven't processed yet. Inside was a string of numbers and letters, routing codes. She recognized the format immediately, and a brief message. You don't know what this is. Keep it that way. Delete this. Sorry. She turned the phone to face Stellan. He read it without touching the phone. His jaw tightened once, a small, controlled movement, and then he was still again. He sent the routing codes to you, Stellan said. Not a question. I don't know what they are, Jolene said, and then, because she was constitutionally incapable of maintaining a useful fiction when the truth was sitting right in front of her. I mean, I can see what they are. I work in finance. But I have no relationship with these accounts, no access to your systems, and until approximately 90 seconds ago, no knowledge that any of this existed. Stellan looked at her for a long moment. He knew my people were tracking his accounts, he said. He couldn't move the codes through any channel we were monitoring, so he found someone adjacent, visible enough to create misdirection, but distant enough from his operation that we'd lose time verifying the connection. The realization arrived in pieces, and then all at once, the way bad news tends to. Derek Vasquez had assigned her to table 11. Not Gerald. She'd assumed Gerald, but Gerald had said the bride requested it, and the bride, Cassandra, luminous in her engineered gown, had been marrying a man who was apparently a criminal, and who had, in the course of planning his own wedding, taken the time to identify the most invisible and used that invisibility as a tool. She was supposed to be too small to notice, too peripheral to chipek, too periphery. The champagne glass was still in front of her. Jolene picked it up and set it back down, and felt the very specific anger of a woman who has spent years being exactly what someone just used her for. Quiet, tucked away, easy to overlook, and who has done absolutely nothing to deserve it. He used me, she said. Her voice had changed. She could hear it. Yes, he sat in a contract meeting with me for 2 hours in February, and he looked at everything except my face, and then he spent whatever time he had between then and tonight, figuring out how to make me useful without ever actually looking at me. And he put me at table 11 in the back of the room next to the kitchen doors, because he needed a body that nobody would look at twice. She set her phone down on the table, and it almost worked. Something moved through Stellan Rourke's expression. She couldn't name it precisely. It was not pity. It was not anything simple. It didn't work, he said, because you tracked the email. Because, he said. I looked at the floor plan for this event when his phone went dark, and I saw your name on the staff roster, and I know what you do, and I've read the work you did on the Meridian account reconciliation 2 years ago, and I thought, he stopped. He seemed to be editing something. I thought it was worth having this conversation before I assumed the obvious. Jolene stared at him. You read my reconciliation report. It was very good. This was, objectively, not the most pressing issue in front of her. She filed it away. What happens now? She asked. Now, Stellan said. My people locate Derek Vasquez and you. He looked at her with the same measured quality he seemed to bring to everything. Unhurried, thorough. You become a liability, not to me. To whoever Vasquez sold those codes to, if he's already sold them. They'll assume you know what they contain. I do know what they contain. I can read routing code. They'll assume you know more. Jolene pressed her hands flat against the table. Under the palm of her right hand, she could feel the edge of her hotel ID lanyard, which she'd tucked under her place setting when she sat down because wearing a lanyard to a black tie wedding felt like its own specific kind of defeat. She thought about the bus she took home from the hotel on nights like this. She thought about the fact that she lived alone, and her building had a buzzer that half the tenants just buzzed anyone through, and she had been in this city for 6 years and had made herself very small in it, because that was the efficient and non-disruptive thing to do, and it had never once occurred to her that someone might look at that smallness and see a resource. "I can go to the police," she said. "You can." His tone didn't change. "They'll take a report. Vasquez will be across 2 borders before they finish processing it, and the people he may have sold those codes to will not particularly care about the distinction between a target and a witness. So, what are you suggesting?" Stellan Rourke did not look away from her. He had not looked away from her once since he sat down, and she was abruptly aware of this because it was not the experience she was accustomed to. People looked away. They looked at the thing behind her, the person beside her, the middle distance. They looked at her badge and her spreadsheets and the number at the bottom of the invoice, not at her. "I'm suggesting," he said, "that you are not safe in your apartment tonight, or tomorrow, or until I've recovered what was taken and dealt with whoever took it. I'm suggesting that the safest place for you is somewhere that I control." He paused, and then added with a precision that felt almost careful. "I'm also suggesting that the work you just did, reading a routing string in 3 seconds and identifying what it was, is exactly the kind of clarity I could use in the next 48 hours. Jolene looked at him. "You want me to help you? I want you to be somewhere that no one who means you harm can reach you. That those 2 things overlap is incidental." She almost laughed. It came out as something shorter and sharper. "You're telling me I was used as an unknowing courier for what I'm guessing is a significant amount of stolen financial data, by a man who never once acknowledged that I exist, at his own wedding reception, in the back corner of a ballroom, and now the safest thing I can do is go somewhere with." She gestured at him, at the 4 men still standing at the entrance, at the entire atmosphere he had walked into the room carrying. "This, yes." She picked up her phone. She deleted the email from Derek Vasquez. Then she opened her hotel accounting app, logged the catering overtime under the correct code, and submitted it. She closed the app. "The catering manager is going to have questions in the morning," she said. "I'll have someone call Gerald Fitch," Stellan said. "Gerald will have a lot of questions." "Gerald will have no questions," Stellan said, with a quiet certainty that managed to be entirely without menace and completely final at the same time. Jolene stood up. She gathered her clutch and her lanyard and her phone. The elderly man beside her had fallen asleep again. The woman with the phone was staring. Across the ballroom, the bride was still dancing, and the expression on her face had shifted in the last 10 minutes from performed happiness to something more genuine and more fragile, the face of a woman beginning to understand that the night was not going to end the way she'd planned. Jolene looked at that face for a moment and felt something that was not quite sympathy, but lived in the same neighborhood. Then she turned and followed Stellan Rourke out of the ballroom. The car was black and long and sat in the private loading bay behind the hotel, with the unhurried authority of a vehicle that had never once been ticketed. Jolene got in and sat very straight on the leather seat with her clutch in her lap and watched the city lights slide past the window like something she was leaving behind. Stellan sat beside her. He made a call in a low voice. She caught phrases, nothing complete, and then he was quiet. The silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her, because she was in a car with a man she'd known for 40 minutes, heading to a location she didn't know, on a night that had detonated into something unrecognizable, and discomfort seemed like the appropriate response. But there was something about the quality of his silence that was not pressuring. He wasn't waiting for her to fill it. He wasn't performing. He was simply there, in the way that certain people are simply there, taking up space without requiring anything of it. "You said you read my reconciliation report," she said. "On the Meridian account." "Yes, that was an internal document. It never left the hotel's system." He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. "How did you know Derek Vasquez was going to do what he did?" she asked. "I didn't. I knew someone inside my operation was redirecting funds. I spent 3 weeks narrowing the field. Vasquez made one error, in September. He used a device that was registered to this hotel for a secondary authentication. It flagged 6 weeks later in a pattern scan." He paused. He was careful. He simply wasn't careful enough. "And the codes he sent to me, what do they access? Shell accounts. 3 of them. The funds themselves have been rerouted twice since last night. He moved fast once he knew we were close. But the routing architecture is what matters. If someone else has those codes and they understand how to use them, they can follow the structure backward." He glanced at her. "Which is where your particular skills become relevant. You want me to trace the reroutes. I want you to look at what we have and tell me if what I'm thinking is right or wrong." He said this the way people said things when they were accustomed to being told they were right and had learned to be precise about the moments when they needed the alternative. "I've been told I'm looking at a 3-move fund shift. I want a second opinion." Jolene looked out the window. The city was thinning into the elevated expressway, and below them the street grid spread out in the yellow dark, neat and indifferent. Somewhere in it, Derek Vasquez was moving. "He called me fat," she said. Stellan turned his head toward her. "In February, when we passed in the corridor. He didn't think I heard him. He said it to someone on his phone, just after he walked past me, he said." She stopped. She had not repeated this to anyone. She had packed it away with the professional efficiency she applied to most things that hurt. "She looks like every other back-office accountant, soft, easy to not see." She felt Stellan go very still beside her. "Soft," she repeated, like it was a synonym for something he could use. The car was quiet for a moment. "He was wrong," Stellan said. His voice had not changed volume or tone. But there was a weight behind it now that had not been there before. Not about the fact, about what the fact meant. She didn't say anything. "Softness is not the same thing as absence," he said. "He saw you as a gap in the room. Something his eye moved across. That's a specific kind of blindness, and it's expensive." Jolene stared at the road ahead of them. Something in her chest had been tight since February, since the corridor, since the precise word soft delivered at her back by a man who thought he wasn't being heard. She became aware that it was slightly less tight now, not because of anything that had been resolved, but because she was sitting in this car and had looked at her straight on and had not looked away. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My building." It's secured." He paused. "You'll have your own space." "I'm not." He stopped, reworked something. "You're not a prisoner, Jolene. You can leave any time you choose. I'm asking you to stay because it's safer, and because I need what you know. Both of those things are true, and if I solve your problem, what happens then?" "Then you go home," he said, "or wherever you want to go, with the knowledge that the problem is solved and the people connected to it are no longer in a position to be inconvenient." She turned to look at him directly for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. Up close, in the layered dark of the moving vehicle, his face was different than it had been in the ballroom, less performed, somehow. More like a face and less like a controlled surface. "You're not what I expected," she said. Something shifted at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, the place where a smile might go in someone who'd made fewer compromises. "You're exactly what I expected," he said. "That's not a common experience." The building was in the north of the city, set back from the street behind a gate that opened at the car's approach. The lobby had high ceilings and no art on the walls, and the particular austere calm of a space designed to communicate that it did not need to impress you. The elevator required a keycard and a code. The penthouse floor opened into a space that was large and uncluttered, with north-facing windows that looked out over the lake, which was black and enormous and quietly authoritative in the dark. Jolene set her clutch on a chair and walked to the window. "There's a room to the left," Stellan said behind her. "Bathroom's en suite. I'll have clothes sent up. I don't know your size. 16, she said to the window. She'd learned to say it without a pause. She'd had to practice that, which was its own quiet indignity. "All right." No hesitation, no adjustment in his tone. Simply, "all right," like a number was a number. "Where are the files?" she asked. He brought a laptop to the dining table, already open to a ledger interface she didn't recognize but could read. She sat down, still in her dress, pulled her shoes off under the table, and started working. It took her 2 hours. She knew what she was looking at within the first 20 minutes. But she took the full 2 hours because she wanted to be certain, and because the architecture of what Derek Vasquez had done was genuinely elegant in the way that bad things sometimes are, if you could observe them from far enough outside the damage. He had run the redirects through 4 intermediary accounts, each one registered to a different jurisdiction, each one set to auto-close after a single use. It was designed to dissolve behind itself, like footprints in water. But he'd made the same error twice. A timing signature, the precise interval between the authorization ping and the fund transfer, 3 seconds longer than any standard protocol, that appeared on 2 of the 4 accounts. It was the kind of thing you'd only see if you were looking at the raw timestamp data, not the surface ledger. Most people looked at the surface ledger. Jolene did not look at the surface ledger. "There," she said, turning the screen towards Stellan, who had been working at the other end of the table, and who looked up with an attention that was complete and immediate. She pointed to the 2 flagged timestamps. He used the same external verification tool both times. It's not his. It's a third-party authentication service registered in Latvia, mostly used by boutique fintech firms. If he used it, whoever he transferred the final funds to used it too, because they'd need the same protocol to receive the transfer cleanly. Stellan looked at the screen for a long moment. "Harmon," he said quietly, to one of the men stationed near the elevator. "Sir, pull every account registered to Vasine Baltic in the last 90 days. Flag anything with a Chicago connection point." "Yes, sir." Jolene leaned back in her chair. The adrenaline was beginning to resolve into a bone-level tiredness, the kind that arrives when your body realizes it's been running on crisis and stops being polite about it. She pressed her hands against the back of her neck. "You found it," Stellan said. "Anyone would have found it, given the right data access and enough time." "No," he said. "2 of my analysts looked at this material for 6 hours before I arrived at your hotel. They looked at the surface layer." He was watching her with that same quality of attention he'd brought to the ballroom. Level, unblinking, like he was reading something and didn't want to miss a word. "You found the time-stamped interval. I went in through the raw data." "Why?" Jolene looked at him. "Because that's where the truth is. The surface layer is what someone wants you to see. The raw data is what actually happened." Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, a small realignment, like a picture being straightened by someone who cared about the angle. "Yes, exactly." Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Unknown number," she answered on instinct. "Jolene." Derek Vasquez's voice was compressed and rapid, with the high, thin edge of a man who had been running and knew he was running out of places to go. "Jolene, listen to me. I know you're with Stellan Rourke. I know what he told you. He's using you, the same way he uses everyone." "Derek," she said. He stopped. "You put me at table 11, she said. "You sat in a meeting with me for 2 hours, and you looked at everything in the room except my face. You said I was soft." She paused. "You sent stolen financial data to my email address and then you left me in a room to absorb whatever came next, and then you called. Silence on the line. I need what's on that laptop, he said. His voice had changed. The edge was still there, but something beneath it had cracked open, and through the crack she could hear who he actually was. Smaller than his crime, and more frightened. Jolene, please. These people will kill me. The timestamp on the Versine Baltic transactions, she said. I've already found it. Your authentication signature is in the raw data on 2 of the 4 accounts. It's already been flagged. She waited a beat. You have about 45 minutes before his people close the circle. You, he started and stopped. How did you? You thought I was soft, Jolene said. You thought soft meant slow. She ended the call. She placed her phone face down on the table and looked across at Stellan Rourke, who had watched the entire exchange with the stillness of someone watching something confirm itself. He'll move, Jolene said. He'll try to get to the accounts directly. He doesn't know they're already locked. As of 11 minutes ago, Stellan said. His voice was even, but his eyes were not. His eyes were doing something that she didn't have a word for, something that combined attention and something warmer, and something that she suspected he was not in the habit of letting be visible. Good. She stood up. Her feet were bare on the floor. She was aware of the full reality of herself. Her size, her rumpled dress, her ruined lipstick, her bare feet, and found for the first time in several months that she was not trying to minimize it. She looked out the window at the lake, which was starting to pale at the edge where the sky was beginning to consider morning. What now? She said. Stellan was standing. He had come around the table, which she hadn't entirely tracked, and was now standing a short distance from her, not close enough to crowd, but close enough that she was aware of it. Of the specific gravity of him, the warmth of him at that distance. He's at the storage facility on Lower Canal, Harmon said from across the room, looking at a tablet. Cameras just picked him up. Stellan didn't look away from Jolene. Take the team, he said. Handle it. Yes, sir. She heard the efficient sounds of people putting on coats, of the elevator opening and closing, and then it was quiet. You could have gone, Jolene said. You know where he is. I know where he is, Stellan agreed. I know where the accounts are. I know what was taken, and I know how to recover it, and I know what happens next. He looked at her with an evenness that was becoming familiar, that she was learning to read as something other than coldness. I've known those things for approximately an hour and a half. She stared at him. You stayed. I stayed. Why? The almost smile was back, he said. Because you went into the raw data. It was not, objectively speaking, a romantic thing to say. It was somehow the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. She wasn't sure how to account for this. You looked at me, she said, in the ballroom. I looked down, and when I looked up, you were already walking toward me. I know, people don't usually. She stopped. She wasn't going to finish that sentence. It was too true and too exposed, and she'd only known him for one night, even if the night had been the length of several lives. I know, he said again, and she understood that he was not agreeing with the thing she hadn't said. He was acknowledging that he understood what had been behind it. He reached out, and his hand, large, careful, with the deliberateness of someone who understood that gestures carried weight, settled against the line of her jaw. His thumb traced the edge of her cheekbone. She did not pull away. He called you soft, Stellan said. His voice was very quiet, like he thought that was a diminishment, like he thought that word described the whole of you. His thumb moved. He had no idea what he was looking at. And you do? She asked. I'm beginning to, he said. I'd like the time to find out. Outside the window, the lake was turning silver. The city was still dark, but the dark was thinning, the way it does in the last hour before dawn commits to itself. It was a new day arriving through the old one, not erasing it, but overtaking it. And Jolene Pruitt stood in a penthouse she hadn't expected to be in, having found what she was looking for in data that everyone else had skipped. and felt the specific, serious weight of being seen by someone who had come looking precisely because they knew where to look. "You should get some sleep," Stellan said, his hand dropping from her face with the care of someone setting down something that mattered. "There's still work to do in the morning." "There's always work to do in the morning," she said. "Yes." And this time the smile made it all the way to his face. "That's why I need someone who goes into the raw data." She was still smiling when she fell asleep, in a room that wasn't hers, in a city that was exactly what it had always been, full of people who would walk past her and not see her. And she was beginning to understand, for the first time in a long time, that the people who mattered would find exactly what they were looking for.